to tell. He had a defense, and he wanted to get up there, whether it was him telling the story, or Joe Lopez, that his son, his brother conspired to steal his millions of dollars that he had and lock him up for life. And that's exactly what happened. But Frank wanted to tell the story his way. And every time he tried to explain something, the prosecutor or the judge would cut him off. And the first 3 times, it didn't bother Frank. But after the 6th, 7th time with the objections, Calabrese started to lose his temper because the judge would not allow him to go on and on and on the way he was. Again, to Frankie, his brother was the killer. His son lied and set him up and stole all his money, which is partially true. But to see this man, an outfit killer, a real mob guy, in person, lose his temper, pound his fist, yell out loud, I'll never forget it. But he was a very hostile witness. Judge Zagel threatened him many times that he would remove him from the courtroom or even have him shackled or gagged. But imagine seeing a Chicago outfit boss go off like that in a federal courtroom. Frank Calabrese said the only thing he was guilty is running the largest loan shark operation in Chicago. He admitted to being the biggest loan shark in Chicago, made millions of dollars, admitted knowing guys like Angelo LaPetria, but said he never used violence, that violence was bad for business. And to keep going at the family secrets trial, right? If this guy would have shut up and let his lawyers do all the talking, he probably had the best lawyers, Ralph Metchik, Daryl Goldberg, and Damian Sharonis. He might have walked out of there. Here's Twan, right? Anthony Twan Doyle. He was a corrupt cop, Chicago outfit associate, and he was good friends with Frank Calabrese. Him and another defendant at the family secret trial, crooked cop Michael Ricci, would visit Calabrese in prison. They would talk in code, and they were trying to get that bloody glove out of the evidence room at the Cook County Department. As we all know, evidence went missing out of the evidence room for years, no evidence, no trial. So they were trying to get the Feckerata bloody glove out of that evidence room. Doyle was caught signing onto the computer, signing off, his name, how long he was on the computer, and he only looked up one piece of evidence, and that was the bloody glove. Doyle, after seeing Joe Lombardo and Frank Calabrese fail on the stand, he decided to testify in his own behalf. I seen Doyle testify because he was out on bond. He thought he was slick. He wasn't locked up in the MCC like the rest of the defendants. So Doyle thought he could outsmart Marcus Funk, John Scully, Mitch Mars, 3 of the best attorneys, 3 of the best prosecutors in the country. He came across nice when his lawyers were throwing him softballs, but he didn't come across so well during a grueling cross-examination. So if Twan would have just shut up, he might have been better off for him. But again, he decided to take the stand. He came across a little arrogant, a little cocky. Maybe that's how he is. Maybe because he's out, not in jail. But he ended up getting convicted. And I'll never forget when they had character witness testify saying what a great cop Twan was, what a great man he was. Prosecutor would ask the guy, have you ever went to visit a mob boss in prison? The retired cop or sergeant would say, no further questions. Meaning, why would you, a Chicago cop, Chicago sergeant, be visiting a mob guy like Frank Calabrese in prison? It was quite obvious what Twan was doing. He was kind of a Frank Calabrese messenger to the outside, if you will. But he was convicted, and it was interesting to see him on the witness stand trying to win one over during the prosecution, and it didn't work. We'll keep going. This is going to be a long one, guys. Bear with me. I'll never forget seeing this woman here, Mrs. Seifert. She testified in court the day her husband was killed when Joey was there. So her testimony was powerful. You know, some of the jurors were a little upset. seeing a woman in tears, going back to the 70s when her husband was killed. She believed that it was Joey Lombardo that was one of the masked gunmen. She said she could tell by his moves, his mannerisms, that he was cagey, the way he walked, kind of like a boxer. But Johnny Lear and myself, we feel Rick Halperin was too soft on her during the cross-examination. He didn't really grill her because he didn't want to upset her any further. Because, yeah, Joey had the mask on, but that's not 1,000% proof. But as we all know, the government had the victim's wife, Danny Seifert's wife, Emma Seifert. Her two sons were in court every day. So God bless the Seifert family. God bless Danny Seifert. But it was very compelling evidence to see Mrs. Seifert testify to the day her husband was killed. And her testimony helped the government prove that Joe Lombardo was one of the men in the ski masks. But Mrs. Seifert testified what happened that horrible day. Another witness at the family secrets trial that I seen in court was this character here, Bobby the Beak Siegel. You should see the nose, the schnoz on this guy. He's actually related to Bugsy Siegel. Now, he testified that he did some scores with Frank Calabrese, and he would always refer to Frank Calabrese as Frankie Far Away because Frankie was nowhere near the score. He was usually planning the score or out as a lookout. And one time, him and Calabrese did a score. He went into the house. He noticed there was a dog. He came right out. Frank Calabrese said, "What are you doing?" And he told him, "Hey, there's a dog in there." And Frank Calabrese said, "So what?" Bobby the Beak told him, "I don't do dogs," meaning I'm a career criminal. I'll do some heavy work, but I don't do dogs. The whole courtroom started laughing. But that's Bobby the Beak. He decided to flip and cooperate as well. They used him in other trials. This wasn't the first time that he's ever testified, but he did testify that during the when all the burglars connected to the Tony Accardo break-in, when all those guys started to disappear and eventually were found brutally killed, he testified that a lot of his friends went missing, meaning a lot of those burglars were some of his friends. And one day he got a call. Somebody said John DeFranzo had a score for him, but he caught the play. He knew if he went on that score or looked at that score, they were going to set him up and have him killed because he was the only Jew. When he said he was the only Jew, they were killing everybody from different races, an Italian, an Irishman, a Spanish guy, Puerto Rican. He was the only Jew. They were going to kill Bobby Siegel as well. But luckily, he decided to take a lie detector test through his lawyer, and somehow, some way, the outfit bosses gave him a pass. But Bobby Siegel could easily have gotten killed back then, and in retrospect, they probably should have killed him because he didn't appreciate the fact that they gave him a pass, and he ended up snitching on him. But I've seen this piece of shit in court as well. I wouldn't have found him credible. They also had a white-haired gentleman, handsome gentleman called Captain D. He testified in court at the family secrets trial that he ran Angelo Petria's club, and there was word there. Angelo Petria was hated so much, but when he died, they took a photo off the wall at the club, and everybody stomped it and destroyed it. That's how much they hated Angelo Petria. But Captain D testified to his relationships with the Frank Calabrese crew, Angelo Petria, and other guys from the 26th Street crew. Captain D ran the social club, and I think he's still running it today. Now, here's a guy, a good friend of Frank Calabrese. He's Mr. Stoffel. He testified. He owned all the father and son pizzerias. He was good friends with Frank Calabrese. And one day, Nicky Ferriola and a couple other guys came in and demanded a couple $100,000, or he was going to get hurt. So the owner of Father and Sons didn't know what to do. He ran to Frank Calabrese. Frankie Calabrese told him he would look into it. He ended up getting the extortion money down. So here's Mr. Salfi thinking Frank Calabrese did him a favor. What he didn't realize was Frank Calabrese was behind the extortion the entire time. That's what these guys do. So seeing this gentleman, an honest businessman, he also testified that he would go on vacations with Frank Calabrese, that they were good friends. Another guy, Neff, we're going to call him. This is Angelo Petria's grandson. He testified in court. The government subpoenaed him. I'm sure Neff, I'm definitely sure he wanted nothing more to be sitting in a federal courtroom. But he basically testified to some of the gambling and juice operations that Frank Calabrese had going. He wasn't really snitching. He was just basically answering questions, proving that, there was some gambling going on, because they would have his nickname Neff on one of Frank Calabrese's little black book. But he was a witness. Not really sure why it was pretty much a waste of time, but just to see him in the courtroom was pretty interesting. Johnny Lira, a good friend of mine from the Grand Avenue neighborhood, he was a witness as well. He was a character witness for Joey Lombardo. He testified what a great guy Joey was, that Joey was kind of a gearhead, always working on a car or a piece of equipment in the neighborhood, that Joey got a lot of people jobs, that Joey supported all the boxers, all the football, the softball players with gears and uniforms. So he just basically said that Joe Lombardo was not the boss of any outfit, not that he knew of, that Joey was a swell guy. Joey's also the guy that questions why Rick Halpern didn't press Mrs. Seifert. But God bless Johnny Lira. He was I think he was the weatherweight or lightweight boxing champion at one time. You could catch some of his fights on YouTube, and you could actually hear Howard Cosell as the announcer. I'll never forget having drinks with Johnny Lira at Richard's Bar back in the day, but God bless this man. He was a character witness at the Family Secrets trial for Joey. Another witness, a victim of the Chicago outfit, this gentleman here, Angelo Petria, or Victor Cacciatore, testified how Angelo Petria extorted $2 million out of him. At first, they sent Ronnie Jerry and Nick Calabrese to put dead mice on Victor Cacciatore's car. Then they put little nooses and hung them from the antenna. Then they eventually blew out his back window. Victor Cacciatore was scared to death. He went to Angelo Petria. Angelo offered him protection. The whole time, Angelo Petria scanned Victor Cacciatore out of a couple million. But I'll never forget Victor Cacciatore as an older gentleman walk into court and testify how the 26th Street crew extorted him. Now here we got Mike Sarno, the Mike Sarno trial, right? What was interesting about this trial is they showed the Chicago outfit's relationship with the outlaw motorcycle gang. And same thing, if it wasn't for the informants, Mike Sarno would have never got convicted. This low-life piece of shit, I like to call him VD. We all know what VD stands for. But he testified against Mike Sarno. He had beef with Sarno. He was warned repeatedly to get his machines out of certain businesses. He wouldn't listen. He had face-to-face confrontation with Sarno. He disrespected him, and that was it. Allegedly, Sarno and the Outlaws decided to blow up one of his buildings. But this lowlife testified in court, came across pretty cocky, pretty arrogant. Shame on you. That's all I got to say. Another lowlife that testified against the Sarno crew was this guy, right? Mark Hay, along with Kyle Knight. I mean, these guys were fucking career criminals, burglars, thieves, chomos, drug addicts, degenerate gamblers, the worst of the worst. Why Polchman and Sarno would hang out with somebody like this, I have no idea. But this lowlife was doing a home burglary. The old man caught him in the act. The old man was actually whooping his ass. In order to break free, he stabs the old man in the leg. Didn't kill the guy, but stabbed him in the leg just to break free. That's what kind of guy testified against Mark Polchman and the Mike Sarno crew. This lowlife here. He actually wore a wire when he picked up the bomb from Master Blaster Samuel Volpendenzo. He got Sam on tape talking about Tony Accardo, talking about Mad Sam DeStefano, talking shit about Large, talking about the Northside crew, bragging how he put 2 weeks into the bomb. But this guy here, if it wasn't for him, Mike Sarno, Mark Polchman would have been, there wouldn't have been a trial. They would have both been found not guilty. He wore a wire on the crew, lied on the stand, got away with perjury, and nothing got done. He also got his living expenses paid. I don't know how this lowlife lives with himself. I can't even talk about him anymore. Another witness at the Mike Sarno trial was ATF agent Lou, Big Lou. Somehow he got close with Mark Polchman. Mark Polchman trusted him. And the whole time he was an agent. Once they blew up the video poker company building, the ATF got involved, and that's when the investigation got pretty serious. But he testified how much he liked Mark Polchman. He actually said he actually felt bad when he had to walk into the room in front of the agents and come clean. And that's the day Mark Polchman realized, oh my God, you were an informant. I actually introduced you to my family. But now, what is Lou doing? He's writing books. He wants to make a movie. He's doing interviewing. He's profiting like Junior off of wearing a wire and flipping against guys. I don't remember if Lou wore a wire, but I know they had the pawn shop wired up. But I seen him testify as well. I also seen in every major mob trial, there's always cops and federal agents that testify. The federal agents' testimony, because they talk about the 3, 4, 5-year investigation. So you get some insight into that. Usually they're very credible, most of the agents, but it's the cops, the sheriffs. Some of those guys you got to question because they're known to lie on the stand. Crooked-ass cops. So you definitely see cops and federal agents take the stand as well. A lot of tax agents, ATF agents. Speaking of cops, here was a defendant at the Mike Sarno trial, James Frattanano. He flipped. I seen him testify. He was actually on police calls. He would case the place, and then if they had cash, drugs, guns, artwork, anything of value, he would tip off the Sarno crew or tip off some of the outlaw guys to rob the joint. That's what kind of cop he was. He testified in court that Mike Sarno was the boss, that Mark Polchman was just underneath him. All hearsay, all bullshit. He testified that he had a mobbed out father that lived in Florida, and he would drive down a couple of times a year, bringing hundreds of thousands of dollars in drug money or money from the burglary crew. But this is a Berwyn cop, a corrupt, disgraced cop. I seen him testify. Again, if I'm on that jury, I'm not listening to anything this guy has to say. The worst of the worst, right? Steve Mendel, crooked cop, outfit wannabe. I'm not even going to call him associate. I was at his trial. Him and another crooked cop had a club. They called it Club Men. It was a space they rented out, a commercial office space, where they would bring people there to torture them. They would extort money, owners of strip clubs, businessmen. If they refused to pay, they would give them to the club and torture them. I actually seen this piece of shit testify in his own defense. I'd rather hang out with Osama bin Laden, O.J. Simpson. This guy's locked up. I can't believe he had the balls to even take the stand in his own defense. The worst of the worst. John Burge, right? I went to his trial at all. I went to his trial as well. Because of the statute of limitations, they could not charge him with the hundreds of innocent people he tortured, right? But he lied to the FBI, so they charged him with one count of lying to the FBI. And the government had 3, 4, 5 innocent black men. Now, these men were probably in their 50s when they testified. They testified that when they were 18, 19 years old, anytime a major murder took place, John Burge and his fellow coppers would round up the usual suspects, and they would torture these guys. They would deprive them of food. They would lie to them, tell them they're going to go home. They would take the plastic typewriter covers and suffocate them. They would burn them with cigars. They would hang them out the window by their hands. All kinds of nasty shit. They would also use electric shock. They would put alligator clips on their balls, on their testicles, on their ears, and shock them. Torture tactics that John Burge learned in Vietnam. Now, I seen John Burge in court. He didn't testify. The only person there to support him was his brother. But the government had, like I said, 5, 6 witnesses, men that were tortured by John Burge. None of them knew each other. They all had a very similar pattern of police abuse. And what really got me is a couple of these victims of John Burge's torture had alcohol in their breath, meaning the cops were drinking while they were beating and torturing these guys. That's what was going on in the Chicago Police Department, right? So these guys got convicted for murders they never committed, and then through the great universities in DNA research, 20, 30, 40 years later, they were freed because they were innocent. They finally come home, and they sue the city of Chicago for hundreds of millions of dollars. You have no idea how much money the city pays out in corrupt cop cases like this. But John Burge was the worst. Allegedly, he tortured over 100 innocent black people and white people too. Johnny Lira told me that he did a score one time. Burge got a hold of him, took him down to 11th and State, held him out the window 11 stories up, and threatened to let him go if he didn't say who's your sponsor, who you're working for. This particular score Johnny did on his own. He wasn't doing it for the Grand Avenue crew. But luckily, John Burge didn't let him go. But John Burge was the worst of the worst. Now we'll keep going here, right? An old friend of mine, John Kappas. This guy was the biggest drug dealer in the southwest side of Chicago. 21 years old. He got caught. The judge gave him 40 years in prison. I seen his girlfriend, who I know very well, Julie Craig. She testified against him in court, dressed in Gucci, Prada, Chanel, all bling bling. All those gifts she received from her drug dealer boyfriend. And what does she do? She rats him out. John, thank God, got his sentence reduced to 20 years. He did 20 years like a man, never ratted, never rolled on anybody, did his time like a man, came home and totally turned his life around. But God bless John Pappas. But I'll never forget, his own girlfriend testified against him. Now here we'll talk about some witnesses, right? It wasn't just mob trials that I went to. I went to the Helen Brock, the disappearance of Helen Brock. This poor woman's, her body like Hoff has never been found. Richard Bailey, a con man in Chicago, conspired to kill her. It was a bench trial. This woman was worth $30 million when she disappeared. So getting back to the witnesses, the government had 4 or 5 old ladies that they called as witnesses. These women testified that what Richard Bailey would do, he would look up very wealthy men that died and then go to the funeral and befriend the widow. So these widows who were vulnerable, they just lost their husbands, they were devastated, they had all this money, Bailey would befriend them. Some of them, he became their lovers. He would wine them, dine them, take them to the Drake, take them to the pump room, travel with them, going to Aspen, going to Vegas. He would rent fancy sports cars and take them out. And then he hit them up for a loan. He'd ask them for a couple $100,000. They'd be like, well, I only got 150. Okay, he'd take the 150 and never pay him back. So he showed a pattern, and he would destroy woman after woman after woman. Along comes Helen Brock. They had a friendship, maybe even a possible love affair. They became very close. They hung out together. She was passionate about horses, right? Thoroughbred horses. He sold her a couple thoroughbred championship horses for a couple $100,000. Well, she found out later these horses were ready for the glue factory. They were duds. They were only worth $1,000. She was not only hurt, but she was pissed. She was devastated. So the prosecution had all these women get up there and show that there was a pattern of old women, old con man Bailey was going after. When Helen Brock found out that these horses were ready for the glue factory, she was pissed. She threatened to go to the authorities. She had a special doctor's visit up in Minnesota back in the 70s. She's never been found. So I went to the bench trial where the government was able to prove that Richard Bailey definitely conspired to kill Helen Brock. Now here, the worst of the worst, at the at the Tony Resco and the Blago trial, one of the government's informants, I don't know where they find these lowlifes. You had Stuart Levine, a lobbyist. This guy's well known in the political circuits. He testified against Tony Resco in the scam, that Tony Resco was the mastermind behind the scam. He also testified against Ed Burke. He gave information on Ed Burke, Alderman Ed Verdoliak, Madigan, etc. Testified against Blago. During the day, at the famous Purple Hilton Hotel, now that's the hotel up north, right outside of Skokie, where Alan Dorfman was killed, right? He was killed in the parking lot. During the day, Stuart Levine testified that him and his gay friends would have wild sex, drug, booze parties during the day at that hotel. Not on the weekends, but sex, drugs, and rock and roll parties with gay men and who knows what else going on at the Purple Hotel. That's what kind of low life that these guys associate with, Stuart Levine. Now, I'm almost done. It's been an hour. But I also went to the Black Gangster Disciple trial, right? Hoover was running a multi-million-dollar drug operation from his prison cell in Vienna. I went to the Vice Lord trial on the west side by my neighborhood. 18 defendants, right? A couple more, all family members. But I probably seen 15 to 20 young black kids, little shorties, that testified they made anywhere from $300 to $500 a day selling cocaine and heroin on the corner. Most of them would lift up their shirt and show where they've been stabbed, where they've been shot. So imagine seeing witnesses like that. And last, old Mike Madigan, right? This is my most recent trial. I'm going to drop a story on Mike Madigan. Mike Madigan's not a mob guy, but he's more of a racketeer. Michael Madigan beat most of his federal trials, but he was acquitted, I think, on 5. He was convicted on 5 of them. In his 80s, he testified in his own defense, like a Anthony Twan Doyle, like a Frank Calabrese, like a Joe Lombardo. But he came across pretty well. He didn't need any coaching. He's been doing this his whole life. But unfortunately, he was convicted. We'll talk about that. But he was another witness that decided to take the stand in his own defense. And I'll say it once, I'll say it one more time. If it wasn't for most of these informants, guys like B.J. Jehoda, Bob Cooley, Nicky Calabrese, Mark Hay, Lenny Patrick, Lavelli, there would be no convictions. That's a fact. A lot of these men would be home today. Guys like Jimmy Marcello, Mikey Sarno, who should be released. They served enough time. They're no longer a threat. There's no such thing as the outfit. That story is over. They had one hell of a run. The government got a lot stronger with technology. But again, without the informants, without guys like this, there would be no convictions. If you like my Chicago mob trial stories, hit the like button, subscribe, share with your friends. Don't be afraid to donate. Stay tuned. I got a lot more. But these are most of the witnesses that actually seen in court, testify in court. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great weekend.